Hi folks, in this video about photographic basics, I'm going to talk about depth of field. Depth of field is the area in a photograph that it is in focus. For example, if you focus on something 6 feet away, depending on your aperture, you may find that everything is in focus for 1 foot beyond that. And 2 feet before that. Normally, how depth of field works on a lens, again for technical reasons, you normally get the depth of field 1/3 is beyond what you're focused, 2/3 is before it. Understanding depth of field can make so much difference to your photography, whether you are looking for a shallow depth of field, which means a very small depth of field, mainly used to isolate something, a portrait where you want to blur out the background, if you photograph a flower close up and you blur up what's behind it, or why things are blurred as you're closer to them. And then there is a very deep depth of field which is used for, say, landscape photography. Understanding how depth of field works can also help you to make the most of it. For example, as I just said, when you focus on something, due to the science behind the actual focusing, normally, roughly as a ballpark, 1/3 of the depth of field is beyond what you're focused and 2/3 is before it. Therefore, when you look at a lens, you have its closest focusing distance. For example, on this one, it is 1.5 feet. And it works its way all the way, in this particular lens, to 30 feet, and the next one is infinity, which means obviously everything beyond that is in focus. Now, as you stop the lens down, the depth of field increases. Again, you can look up all of the science with that, because it will just be jargon if I try to tell you now. When you close the lens down, you'll get to a point where, for example, everything like on this lens, this is an old Nikkor AIS lens, and the reason I'm using this one is it has little lines on it. They are depth of field indicators, and they're color coded to show you that as you close the lens down, it shows you how wide your depth of field is. Now, if I were to close this right down to say f16, which is the outer line, basically when I focus to infinity, it shows me on the blue line, which is for f16, that everything beyond 15 feet or 5 meters is in focus. However, if you look very closely, you'll see that there's infinity and the other blue line is beyond that. Now, once you understand how depth of field works relative to the aperture, for example, if I'm using f16, I could literally put the infinity, instead of where it is, I could actually move it over to the line that corresponds with f16, meaning that instead of everything being focused from 5 meters or 15 feet away, everything will be focused from 2 or 3 meters away, because I bring that area that is in focus, the depth of field, further this way, but I still keep infinity within the focused area. That's something for trial and separation. I know it might seem a lot, but it is worth researching and understanding and experimenting. The beauty of digital is that you can experiment. So next time you go out and photograph a landscape or whatever it is, close down your lens as much as you can, and then focus to infinity, and then try to bring your focus back a little bit until you get to the point where infinity begins to blur, and you'll see that you can actually play around with the depth of field, in other words, your point of focus, to gain more area in the foreground that is actually in focus. Now, this can be done the other way around, even when you're using a very shallow depth of field, if you're opening your lens up a lot, to actually limit how much is in focus behind your subject. Now, this lens, this is a 1.4 lens. So when this lens is opened right up, this lens lets a lot of light in. And not only does it let a lot of light in, but also when the lens is wide open, the depth of field is shallower because of the science behind the ratio of the lens field of view and aperture. When a lens is wide open, like this 50mm 1.4, and you're photographing something like a portrait, the depth of field area is very short. So if you focus on somebody's eyes, their ears begin to blur because it's so shallow, the depth of field. Now, there's a little trick you can do if you have a cheaper lens that doesn't open up as far as this, because most kit lenses are 3.5 to 5.6, which doesn't give a very shallow depth of field when it's wide open, meaning that if you photograph somebody, take a portrait, whereas you would like what's behind them to be blurred, more of it will be in focus, so that you don't get that subject separation. They don't jump out at you in a photo. But there are tricks that you can use. Understanding the principle of where the area of depth of field is, or what area is in focus, once you understand that, you can, for example, if you're photographing someone and you don't have a very fast lens but you want to blur what's behind them more than normal, not only do you open your lens wide open, but if you bear in mind that there's an area behind what you have focused on that is in focus, if you bring the point of focus further towards you, it means that there's less and less behind the subject that will be in focus. So next time you're going to take a portrait with someone, if you've got just a kit lens, try, if you can, put your camera on a tripod, focus on them, take an image, and then focus manually, if you can, slightly closer. Basically, you could ask them to move forward 6 inches, focus on them, and then go back where they were and take another photo. Then come even closer to you, and you will reach the limit where you are at the end of the area that is in focus, and everything beyond that will be out of focus. And that's a way that even with a lens that doesn't open up as much, that you can actually make more of the background area out of focus. That's called bokeh. I believe the word bokeh comes from Japanese, but anyway, bokeh is the photographic term for the area that is out of focus. And the bokeh, or background blur, is responsible for justifying more money spent on lenses in photography than anything else. People have become obsessive with it over the last few years. Every article you read about every lens is what the out of focus area looks like. How creamy is it? How smooth is it? How busy is it? People are wanting faster and faster lenses because they want the magic of bokeh. Now, I'm the same. I prefer a lens that can give me the ability to isolate my subject and blur the background. That is more important to me than a lens that is clinically sharp and characterless. I'm not worried about that. I don't do technical photography. I don't photograph brick walls. It doesn't matter to me. This is an old lens. This is 40 years old, this lens. I love this lens for photography. In my previous video, you may have seen me show you another old lens. That's a Minolta 58mm f1.4, and for portraits that's beautiful, and in my opinion that betters anything you can buy today. Why? Because in technical terms it's actually not as good. It's not as sharp. For portraits, I don't want a sharp high contrast lens. I want something that is flattering to people. I don't want something that's going to highlight every little nook and cranny on their face. So each to their own. I do have very, very sharp lenses, but they're not really flattering for portraits. Yes, all of that can be adjusted in post. I must admit, I do love pin sharp eyes, but the rest I prefer to be smoother. So if I do use a sharper lens, then I will post-process it in Photoshop or Lightroom, and I will smooth out the skin to soften it because the lens is just too sharp for portraits. So understanding the way that focusing works and the plane of focus is crucial in being able to capture exactly what you want and make it jump out from the rest of the background if that's what you want, or if you are photographing something like a landscape, to be able to understand how to get as much of that area in focus as possible. The technique that I mentioned earlier about bringing the infinity slightly more towards you, that's called hyperfocal. And if you actually look that up and read it up a few times and digest it, if you are a budding landscape photographer, that will help you very much. Now, the first thing I would suggest to anybody who is thinking to take one step further from a mobile or a compact is to get yourself a camera that has interchangeable lenses. Anything of recent years, as I've said, is fine. What is more important than the camera is the ecosystem of the camera. There's no point in buying a camera that has a really limited choice of lenses, or if the lenses for that camera are ridiculously expensive. For example, I'm filming this on a Nikon V1. This is like a small mirrorless camera, professional camera actually, the V1, brought out by Nikon. I love it for what it is, but the lens choice for this camera is very limited, and apart from one or two mainstream lenses, there isn't really a lot to choose from. They do a wide angle zoom that's very slow, as in it doesn't let in a lot of light, and it is horrendously expensive. And they do make a sort of a prime lens which is suitable for portraits, which again is ridiculously expensive. Whereas with Nikon cameras, for example, you have a pool of lenses going back 50 years that you can use. And some of the, or most of the latest mirrorless cameras, the Fujis, the Sonys, to name a few, you are able to buy an adapter and you can use all of these old lenses on your mirrorless camera. For example, this is a Nikon to Fuji X adapter, and it costs next to nothing. It makes this lens fit onto a Fuji X series body, or it could fit onto a Sony E-mount. And these latest cameras, they have something called focus peaking, which basically not only zooms in at a press of a button on what you want to focus to make it easier to focus, but they also display a bright red, yellow or white outline on everything that is focused when you use turn focus peaking on. So it makes it so easy to focus using a manual lens, which has literally brought life to all of these old lenses. Unless you actually need speed for whatever reason, if you want to get creative, get online, get yourself a few old lenses, get yourself a 50-1.4, get yourself a wide angle lens. And then there's companies that make some wonderful manual lenses now, like Samyang, Seven Artisans. Their lenses are very, very, very good, and they're very fast, and they're not a lot of money. So if you actually get yourself a wide lens and a 50 manual lenses on a mirrorless body, you can really get creative, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on lenses. You have such a huge choice. The reason that this works is to do with something called flange distance, which is the distance from the lens to the sensor. Nikon's, Canon's, the DSLRs, because they have the mirror and they have a bigger flange distance, i.e. the distance from the lens and the plane of focus where it focuses to. That means that because the mirrorless cameras have so much less, then basically any of those lenses with the suitable adapter can fit onto the mirrorless camera, whereas it wouldn't work the other way around. Meaning that for my Fujis, I've got a Minolta, I've got this, I'm going to buy an old, or I've got one on the way, an old Helios 58mm f2 lens, which is a Russian lens that used to go on the old Zenith cameras. It's not brilliant, but it has character and it has a really weird swirling bokeh to it. But again, you can get creative without spending a lot of money, and the best way to do it is with these old manual lenses, because they really do give back creativity. For me, the change was I wanted to go back to basics. I wanted a Fuji camera with dials, with adjustments on the camera. I wanted a manual lens. I want to create and control everything from start to finish and enjoy the process, because it brings out more creativity by doing it that way. If you have any questions on this, please feel free to comment below, ask me, message me, whatever. I'm not going to go into the technical side too much because it will just be jargon, and it's all available online. But if there is anything you do look up online that you would like me to explain further, by all means message or comment, and I will do my best to do so. Okay, bye.